Go ahead, Cleo.
Well, I don't know anything about them. They come to interview you. You're the one that
We'll catch both.
They didn't come to interview me.
Well, we're friends who have been so long separated, like Cleo and I. We're still like ham and eggs. Wonderful friends. Wish we could have had more closer association. Well, I was born on the 11th of July, 1910, to Syracuse, and lived there until I was married in 1931 on June the 3rd. The house where I was born was shared at that time by my mother and her children, and Osriel and Jean Singleton Stoker. Mother lived in part of it, and they lived in part of it. And Wanda, their daughter, was born in that house. So she's Wanda Stoker Wilcox.
Well, let me ask you, where's the singleton come in? I thought she was approved.
Oh, I hope that didn't go in anybody's notes. It was proved. And I was thinking about Singleton because there's somebody out in Hoover that I thought was Jean's sister. She had, oh, that's her married name, Singleton. Okay. Jean Frew. Thanks, Cleo. Well, I was mother's fourth child. Bessie and Albert and Priscilla were older, and my brother Eldridge and Elias, and now they called him Jess, and Margaret, and Jessie and my dad named two of his children Jessie. He named Elias Jessie for the two grandfathers, mother's father and his father, but he wanted a child named after him, so he named the last one Jessie M. Moroni after him. And those, Margaret and Jessie M. Jr., both passed away before they were 2 years old. The little girl was 7 months, and the other one was about 19 months. Well, as I say, my parents were Jessie M. and Priscilla Smith. And our home was really in the focal area of the town of Syracuse. At that time, just 2 houses west of the Syracuse Mercantile Store. I don't know if they called it Walker's store then or not. Did they, Cleo? I always thought it was the Syracuse Merc when I was there. We were also in walking distance of the school, the church, the barber shop, the old hall where we used to have a lot of fun, the mailboxes, and the factory. We walked to all of those places. And Rampton's Market was built after, quite a bit later, after I was born. Also Tolman's home and the blacksmith shop were both really came after when I was about a teenager. Did you say, Cleo?
Tolman something.
And in reflection, I think about our good neighborhood. On the east was Aunt Esther Sessions, who was loved and revered now by everyone who knew her. On the west side at that time was the Varney family, and they had 2 daughters, Virginia and Dorothy. And I think he worked at the factory. He moved when Dorothy was, I think, just out of the 8th grade. I mean, Virginia, she was my age. And the Willard Bambro family moved in there. And what wonderful neighbors they were.
Now, where's this, where Barney's moved?
Barney's, I don't know where Barney's moved after they left Syracuse.
When they's in Syracuse,
And
where they live?
They lived
In that little red,
brick house just west of where my mother lived.
it's by Lanny Holbrook.
Lanny Holbrook's. Yes. Oh.
There's Barney.
And that's where the Willard Bambro lived, and that's where I suppose all of their children were born, if I remember correctly. And see, Sister Bambro died the first year that I was married. That would be 1931, I think. In childbirth, I think it was her 11th child when she passed away. And so I don't know who lived in that house after the Bambros left. But anyway, I just always felt grateful that we had such good neighbors, and they were such a support to my mother and her children when we lived there. And Esther, of course, everybody loved Aunt Esther. Well, she would reminisce about going to school, Cleo. Remember our first school teacher?
Mm-hmm. Edna Cook.
Edna Cook. She was our first and second teacher. Do you remember the little pegs we used to lay out to learn our numbers? And the great big letters they put on the board so we could learn our alphabet. And Edna Cook, I remember, I think it was second grade. She used to have us dramatized stories, like the Three Billy Goat Gruffs and Little Red Riding Hood. She would assign parts for us, and do you remember that, Cleo? I do too. Well, do you remember about Edna? I bet you can remember the long back stockings and all the wet shoes.
Yes, and I can remember when I was in, I don't know whether it was the first or the second grade. I know Edna was still my teacher. Out there in Thurgood, and what was the Moss guys' name? Hayes and Moss. And there was another one, three of them. And, you know, we'd go up there at the east end of the field there and play, you know, in the ditch a lot of the time up there. And these kids, they'd had an old barn out there where when they'd come, they'd park their horses and feed them. And these kids would get their buggy and horses and take off. And I know they was gone. They wanted Art, I think it was. I don't know where they were. I remember I told the boy those kids was going to get at me. I was scared to death of them for a long time. I can remember going in there and running into Edna.
Was Art Anderson principal then?
He came in the middle of the year when we were in first grade.
I think that's right. And I don't know who was the principal before that.
It was Walter Steed.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, 'cause he left and went to the bank.
Well, I've forgotten that, Cleo.
Yeah, it was Walter Steed, and Art came in the middle part of the year and took over.
Well, then our third grade teacher was Mabel Wood from Woods Cross. Our fourth grade teacher was Bertha Thurgood. Remember her?
I remember her, but I can't remember the wood. I can't place her.
I wrote some kind of reflections to Thelma on her Christmas card and asked her if she remembered the time when Bertha Thurgood assigned everyone in the fourth grade to memorize a poem. And she was giving a prize for the one who said it the best. Do you remember that?
Well, it wasn't me, I'm sure.
The woman was old and ragged and gray and bent with the chills of the winter day. And so on. It's a big, long poem. Well, I remember the day we all had to stand up one at a time and give that poem. And Thelma won. And I got second. So I was teasing her about that when I wrote to her. And she wrote back and she says the only thing she remembers about that was the prize was a little basket like an Easter basket with candy in it. Anyway, that's a pleasant memory. Well, my dear brother-in-law, Owen Anderson, was our 5th and 6th grade teacher.
Yeah, I remember him, having him.
And he's a good teacher. He just came out, I guess Owen told you something about it coming out there when he was so young.
Yes.
And I
Art
think he was
calling him and him
18.
going.
I think he was 18 and only had just a little bit of college at the University of Utah. Well, he was our 5th and 6th grade teacher. And then, of course, in the 7th and 8th grade, we had Arthur Anderson. Also, George Manning from Hooper came once a week and taught music to the 7th and 8th graders. Do you remember that?
I remember, yeah.
Oh, gosh. He had a wonderful voice,
He did.
really a wonderful voice, and he taught us a lot of songs that kids don't even think about or know now.
Mhm.
But that was interesting.
When you mentioned songs there, we've noticed in reading some of the old programs, some of the old songs. One that comes to my mind was what I had a
Sweet dream.
wonderful dream last night, Mama,
Oh, I had a, yes.
something like that.
Mhm.
And that come through on several programs, but a lot of those songs you don't hear anymore.
I have such a beautiful Sweet Dream Mama, such wonderful, beautiful thing. I think I've got a book with it in.
Do you?
Hmm.
Yes, I remember that. Well, one thing I remember about the 7th and 8th grade, Arthur was an excellent teacher. He really was, both of those remember. Of course, by the time I got to the 8th, no, yes, Owen was my brother-in-law by the time I got to the 8th grade. Because Bessie and Owen, she was so young when they were married. What do you remember about the 7th and 8th grade, Cleo?
Oh, you remember Art Anderson taking cough medicine?
Taking
cough drops and everything else under the sun for me because I'd get a cold and I'd cough from, if I got it in December, I coughed till July.
Well, then,
And he used to bring cough drops and cough medicine and everything, tried to get me coughing. But I did that too, all my life. I don't know why, but even now, if I get a cold, I just hold it off. I can remember going to town with Dad one day, and we got over there, and I was having one of these coughing spells, and he says, "I'm going to take you up to Dr. Duncan and see if he can do anything for you." He took me up there, and they did give me calcium and iron shots, and that helped. And he said that I was deficient in both of them. And they gave me calcium and iron shots, and then they put a violet ray light on you for so long. And I guess he took me over there for quite a few times for that, but it did help. But I still, right to this day, I still cough when I get a cold. It stays with me, that cough does. But why? But Art thought he could cure me. And it wasn't because we didn't try, but it didn't matter what I took or what they did. I just, still cough. And I can remember him having that cough medicine and giving
of course,
it
that
to
was a
me.
one-on-one with you and your preaching.
Now your sister Bessie and Mr. Owen Anderson was telling us some of the pranks they pulled. I imagine they didn't pull any when you got into school.
No, they
That
didn't.
was all done, wasn't it?
What, the kids then?
The kids.
I can remember White saying that some of them, they'd go out of the windows. He said Owen used to break a ruler over some of those kids
Well, I
every
remember.
so often.
You know, Dave Walker was kind of a little rascal. He really gave the teachers a bad time. He wasn't the only one, but I just pointed him out because he was acting up one day, and Owen grabbed him at the back of his collar and the seat of his pants, washed him right out the front door. And when he got to the front door, he gave him a nice kick, and he landed down there on those steps on the ground. I do remember that, Cleo.
Well, I
I was
said
scared.
when we used to go into school, the bell rang and you lined up out in front.
Yeah, I got
And
that here.
if they didn't get in line like they should, there was more than one that got a kick in the seat of the pants
Yeah,
too.
that's for sure. Well, now let's see. I went to Salt Lake City my 9th grade year. And that was quite an experience. My brother Al wanted to go to LES Junior College. He was out of high school then. So Mother and she took me and Jess. And we went to Salt Lake and lived in an apartment right close to town. And Al went to school at LES. The first day, school day, we all had to go register for school. Mother had to take Jess around the corner of our apartment, and I had to go the other way, and I'd never been in the city before, but I had walked over that area so I'd know where to go. I went in that school, and if you can imagine coming out of Syracuse District School, where there was maybe 100 kids in the school, and there was 28, I think, kids in the 8th grade when we graduated. I tried to count them all, and walk into that big building where the kids were just running everywhere, and I did see where it said the office over there, so I went over to the office. The principal was sitting there at her desk, and she asked me who I was, and I gave her my report card and told her. And she said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Oh, I'm from Syracuse." "What are you doing clear out here?" I says, "Well, I'm from Syracuse, Utah, in Davis County."
And they hadn't heard of it. They
No,
thought
I've never heard of Syracuse
New York.
before. But that's one of my memories. But that ninth grade year was a wonderful year for me. I learned how to take care of myself.
You mentioned earlier about the barber shop.
That
That's
was
Homer
Homer.
Walker's. Did they have a confectionery at that time and the barber shop? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I got that written here
If you
someplace.
remember.
What do you remember, Cleo?
Well, that's where the kids always, the only place they could go on Sunday was to the barber shop to get anything, wasn't it? Through
Yes.
the confectionery rack. It wasn't the barber shop, it was his confectionery, but they could go there and buy some candy and ice cream
and
cones.
Gum and
And
pop
ice.
in a bottle, especially cream. We used to call it cream.
Cream soda.
Cream soda. Oh, that was a good one. And the barber chair was down on the end.
Pink popcorn.
Right. That was, let's see.
Yeah, where he cut hair too, but he always kept that open on Sunday, especially Sunday afternoons.
And if we went to the ball game on Saturday, couldn't we go down there and spend our pennies and our money?
And you got more for a penny than you do for a quarter now.
Yeah, you know where the ballpark was.
Right where it is now, up there by
Still there.
Well,
Well,
And everybody shut everything up during the ball game. And it was
That's right.
opened right after the stores
I
and
remember.
blacksmiths
do
and
you
every
remember?
place.
Do you remember who was playing then? Who was on the ball
I
team?
sure do.
Who were they?
Well, Ted Gailey was the catcher. Lynn Hanson and Fay, I think, was a shortstop. And White played one of the bases.
He played at the third base.
think he
Well, he
played
played third, and then he played first. But he played third most of the time.
Well, I remember all three of the Walker boys that lived down in the lower part of
There was
Syracuse.
Chick
Charlie
and
and Chick and
Dave.
and the younger one,
Cecil.
Cecil. They all played baseball.
I didn't know Cecil, or don't remember Cecil playing.
And
I knew
Arnold
the
Miller.
other two.
That lived down there. He played.
Glenn Briggs played.
John Glenn. And I was thinking about that the other day. Have you contacted the Hanson family yet?
We had one interview with Clyde's younger brother, Evan Hanson.
That's good. I'm glad you got a hold of him. And let me just insert this here. One of Walter Steed's daughters lives around the corner over here. Her name is Elsie. Elsie Steed Smith. Remember her? The Steed family lived in the house where Joe lives now, in the big red house. That was Aunt Julia's home. I called her Aunt Julia. And this is her daughter. I'll tell you how I met her after these many, many years. I was at the canning factory on a project for our ward, our state really. And I was standing by a girl and I said, have you ever peeled tomatoes before in a factory? And she said, no, I haven't. And I said, well, I have. She said, where are you from? And I said, well, I'm from Syracuse, Utah. Worked at the Barnes Cannery. She said, do you know Elsie Steed Smith? And I said, well, I sure remember her. She said, there she is, right down there. She's nearly 90 years old. So I went down and introduced myself, and we had the best visit. Did a lot of reminiscing.
And she lives down
She's
here?
right around the corner over here.
Oh, is she?
About 2 blocks away. She lives in a basement apartment with her daughter.
Is her health good?
Yes. She's past 90 now.
Not that bad.
She's in good condition.
Where does Rhoda and or is Medora? Where do they live? Do you know?
Rhoda and Oresteed. Rhoda lives down in southern Utah someplace. I think the last I heard she was at a place called Burl. And her husband had a big seed farm, like raising seeds to sell commercially, you know, I think. And Ora is up in the northwest someplace. That's all I know about them. The last time I saw Rhoda, she came to Louise's, Louise Miller's too.
Yeah, you go ahead, don't let us get you off track there.
Well, going back to finishing, I went back to Syracuse and I finished high school at Davis and graduated in 1929. And that summer, before I went to Utah State, I received a 4-H club sewing scholarship for $100. That went a long ways in those days. So I went to Utah State for 2 quarters. And the night before I left, I was going with Wanda because Wanda and I shared an apartment, Wanda Stoker, Osro's daughter, that was born in the same house I was in. We lived together there for a couple of quarters. Then the money ran out for me and I had to come home. But the night before we left, I had a date with Bird. We had 2 other couples with us, and we went up Ogden Canyon to the Hermitage. And Bert and I went for a little walk in the moonlight, and he gave me a diamond. So the next morning, Wanda was driving in their car then. She came down for me. And I got in the car with all my stuff and showed her my ring. And she said, oh, what the hell did you do that for? That's just the way she said it. If you had known Wanda, you would know she would say that to me. Well, anyway, we had a nice time at school. Well, we kind of covered what we talked about, ringing the school bell, and one of the teachers said that we all got in a long double row and went into class together, and there was always someone to play the piano for the march. As soon as we heard the march music start, we started to go into school and went to our classes, didn't we, Cleo? I remember that so well. I remember Louise playing, Louise Miller, and Bessie played, and I played some.
Yeah, I was telling him, I don't remember whether you ever took lessons, but I said you played by ear,
No,
like
I-
nobody's business.
I took lessons. I've got that in here someplace. Some of the games we played on the school ground were
Fox and geese.
fox. I've got that. Caught fox and geese in the wintertime, and we did a lot of snowballs and made snowmen
And
and
made angels.
made angels. Oh yes, I forgot that one. And the boys, I remember making big circles, and they had little marbles they called Tommies. And they'd make a big circle, and then they'd have a big glassy that they called a top, and they'd shoot that into see how many marbles and the one that got the most out of the circle. And they'd have a lot of marbles in the middle. I remember that so well. They played a game called Perk. Have you heard of that? Well, they made 3 holes, just like a little cup in the ground like that, just 3 little holes. Then they'd stand back and they'd lag, they'd throw the marble, each one in turn. And then they'd have a turn shooting it to see if they had to shoot in the first hole first. Then they could take it out and shoot to the next one. And they were quite a long ways apart. The one that got to the end with the least shots, like off, perhaps. That was a good game. I used to play that with my brothers. I was a tomboy anyway. We played tag a lot. Another thing I remember, Cleo, the girls used to gather rocks, and they'd lay these little rocks out so they looked like a square. And that they would make 2 or 3 squares, and they put little openings like doorways, and we used to play house in those little, just little forms on the ground made out of rocks. And there was a grove of trees on the southwest corner at that time that sheltered, in the hot time. And I remember, Cleo, I remember so well the big canvas-covered school wagons. And this is when Cleo and I kind of solidified our close friendship, was when we used to go over to your place to stay all night, sleep over. And I would go over with Cleo, because I lived close enough to walk to school. But we often did some overnights always over to Cleo's, because she had to help her sweet mother so much when her mother was...
Who drove the school wagon?
Well, I remember one, and that was Brother Sessions that lived down below. Tom Sessions was one.
Tom Sessions?
Tom, I think that's what it was. Was it Thomas?
Thompson, I think.
Thompson, I think. They called him Thomas. And from the south end, it was, I think it was probably one of the Millers, Arnold, I believe. And I think that Brother Bambro did that too later. Yeah.
What the wagon looked like, the school
Just
wagon?
like these regular wagons.
Regular
and they
little wagon had a box around it.
They had seats on both sides of it.
Had a big
And
arch up over the
it was
top
just
to
like
hold
a covered wagon, and then they had seats on both
It
sides.
wasn't quite like a schooner wagon, but but imagine how cold that was to sit in that thing without any heat and come clear from down there by the lake. But anyway,
Well, it was better than walking.
Well, it was.
A lot of times over the snowdrifts.
oh yes, I used to walk when the snow was high and hard. I wouldn't ever go down to the corner and around. I always walk out over the fields because
Over the fences
over the
and everything.
fences. Yeah. Well, she mentioned that the boys rode the horses to school, and there was a shed out in the back where the horses could be sheltered in the summertime and in the winter. Another thing, do you remember religion class?
When we got up into the 8th grade, we taught religion class. Some of the younger ones too.
Not me. I was never a teacher.
Was that held in connection with school or
It was usually
It was
after?
at the schoolhouse, after school,
After school.
once a week.
Did one of the school teachers, well, you talked like you got involved teaching.
Well,
it,
we would get
help
to
them.
help,
One teacher I remember was Bessie Daly. And she's the only one that I can remember, but I know there were more than that.
Did they call him from the ward to
I
assist
think so.
there? Or?
That had nothing to do with, as far as the school program was concerned. That was a ward program. You might,
That's new. We hadn't heard that before.
that's what happened.
That's the school down on 4,000 now.
No.
No, on 2000.
On 2000.
Only it isn't the same school as
Yeah.
it's there now.
Was it the 4 rooms? Was it
Yes.
Still the 4 rooms
It
then?
was when we
Yes,
was
when
there.
we left. When we graduated, there was just 4 rooms still. Well, one of the special memories I have of home was that once a week, a day was set aside for a piano teacher to teach piano lessons in our home. Maybe Bessie mentioned that.
Briefly.
Well, Bessie and I were given our lessons free for the use of our piano. And there were a lot of people, young people, that came for lessons, and the 3 teachers that I remember was Lynn Fairbanks from Salt Lake. He was the one that really, my mother got the piano through him. And Lynn would ride the Bamberger up to Layton. Then he would rent a horse and buggy and drive it out to Syracuse to our home. That was just once a week. The girls that I remember that took lessons were Louise Miller, Steed, and Ivy Walker Woolley. Irma Gailey, and I don't know Irma's married name.
Carlson.
Carlson, okay. Zenas Bennett and Woodard Steed. Now, I think Bessie Gailey took some classes, and I know Helen plays well, but I can't remember if she came to Syracuse. But the teachers were Anna Belknap. After Lynn Fairbanks, there was Anna Belknap from Hooper and Evelyn Field from Roy. And then there was a Mr. Leander Thompson from Bountiful, came to the Gailey's home after Mother didn't do that anymore. And he had students there at Irma Gailey's home, because I took 2 or 3 lessons from him. Well, now let's see. Talk, Cleo.
I'm listening. I'm a good listener.
Well, maybe you remember this. I remember the old chapel, sitting in a great big room on the south side over clear to the far east room. And there was a great big circle of little children sitting on little chairs, and Sister Maggie Wilson was our teacher. Do you remember that?
I don't remember her so much, but we were down in the basement one morning, so I remember most.
Well, I remember when we were in the basement, but this is my first memory of associating with a group of people outside of our own family unit. I was going to Sunday school. And I guess the reason I remember is because one time I received a little book, and oh, I wish I'd saved it. Sister Wilson gave me for 100% attendance over a certain period of time. But I still remember her teaching us a little song that was called Up, Up in the Sky, where the little birds fly, down, down in their nest, where the little birds rest with all the actions. That's
They used to have a lot of those finger play songs, didn't they?
But wasn't that a sweet memory? I just love to think about that. I can just see her.
Well, Aunt Teeny Walker.
That's another one. I couldn't think of her name. She was another one that was one of our teachers.
It's Maddie's mother.
Well, I couldn't write down all the teachers that I remember through the years, but the last Sunday school teacher I had before I was married and left home was Earl Dahl. And he was an excellent teacher. I was in seminary at Davis at that time, and I remember Earl's lessons coincided with what I was learning at school. And I really felt really a double learning experience for the gospel. It was great, greatly helped me all my life. And when I think of a favorite teacher as I grew older, I thought of Earl. He was
He
a
was
wonderful
a good teacher.
Yeah. Well, I graduated from Davis High Seminary.
He had Brother Ensign.
I did, at Brother Ensign.
I
George
only went-
Ensign.
I only went that 1 year.
Yeah, he just went 1 year.
Well, it didn't go a full year then,
No, that's right. I remember you didn't.
but I thought he was a good teacher.
Well, one thing I remember about the chapel was that there was a cleaning day. We used to call it the meeting house. We cleaned the meeting house every spring. Everybody turned out to help. And I can remember climbing a tall ladder to wash the archway over the hall, went back down to the classrooms. There was one on each side of the stand at the front. And it was kind of shaped like that. I remember climbing up on the top of that. I was a tomboy. And I guess they asked me because they knew I could climb that ladder and not be afraid. Anyway, I remember that's just kind of a special memory to think about helping clean the chapel. And there was a big row of trees between the meeting house and the dance hall. We used to call it the hall. In our family, we called it over the hall.
Well, we did, I think everybody did. And they used to have 4th of July celebrations out there in those trees.
And the 24th. Another thing that was over there, they had a big slippery slide over there one year. Handmade, homemade by somebody in the ward. I remember going over there to play alone one day. And we used to take the wrapper from the bread and sit on it and go down, and it was so slippery. And I got about 2/3 of the way down, and it had an abrupt drop, and I was going so fast on that boom boom. And boy, when I hit the ground, I was hurting. That really hurt. And let's see, that was really a wonderful place to play in the summertime, in that old grove. They always had a ward reunion in the hall on Washington's birthday with a program and a big dinner and lots of good food.
And like a ward reunion,
Yes,
wasn't it?
it was a wonderful ward reunion, lots of good visiting. And that,
And this was when?
that was, well, that old grove was there for a long time, and that dance hall was there when I was married. It was still there. But, and that old hall was moved that old hall was used for many, many activities. I remember there were seats, little narrow seats along each side of it. And we'd go to watch the basketball games. And at that time, the old North Davis High School had a good basketball team.
They didn't have a place
They
to
didn't
play.
have a place to play. That was the only place they had to play, and it was kind of crowded in. But I remember Judd played, and the Rampton twins, and Woodruff and Newell Steed, Dave Wilcox, all the Hanson boys, Lynn and Bully and Evan later. I remember all of them running up and down, and that would just ring with noise and excitement. I get thrilled when I think about
Well,
it.
you know, they used to support them a lot more than they do nowadays.
It was
They
a whole
really
thing to
did.
do.
Because they didn't have all these other things going, and then they went to the things.
Yeah, but there was plays and weddings and lots of primary activities and MIA socials and activities and dances with an orchestra. And there was always a special dance to celebrate the end of the tomato canning season. I remember that. Then I think about the Barnes Cannery, and I think about seeing my mother standing at our front gate on November the 11th, 1918, with tears falling down. And she told her children the factory whistle was blowing because the war was over. And it blew all afternoon, I think. That's a special memory of my mom and that old factory whistle. Because the whistle always blew to tell people it was 8 o'clock and you better be where you're supposed to be on that belt to peel tomatoes. And then it would
Could you hear it? You could hear it down all
yes.
around the community.
You could that far. but I
That
don't
far,
think what was on.
not over to Cleo's, you couldn't, but we could hear it from our place all the time. They rang it at noon and rang it at the close of day. They'd ring it at 12 and ring it at 1 so that we could leave and have our lunch and go back. And you're supposed to be there, and I remember the two ladies who really supervised the girls were Pearl Bodley and Bessie Booth, and Eva Barton. Mr. Barton, Spence Barton's wife. Was her name Eva? She married President Miller after her partner died.
Don't seem like that's her name, but I can't. It might be.
Well, anyway, you might check on that. 'Cause
There's, this probably before your time, but there's a period of history there when Syracuse had 2 canneries.
one,
No, one was down in the
No,
lower
this
part.
this is after that. They had, I think, from what I've read anyway, that was the old Syracuse cannery, but after they came up here, there's Kaysville, and then they had,
one at Clearfield.
what's
Davis.
Davis.
Davis County.
Davis County Cannery there in Syracuse. And it only went for about 2 years, 2 or 3 years.
I don't remember,
And
yeah.
then Barnes bought it out.
I didn't know that.
It's probably just before your time, but there was 2 canneries there. right, associated right close together, and I've been trying to get more information.
I don't
So
know anything about that one, or I don't remember anything about
excuse
it.
me there,
No,
I'm sorry,
you
it's probably
know.
before that.
When I worked there, Sessions, Lamar Sessions' dad was the
Oh,
supervisor
really?
for many years.
Oh, let's see.
Ollie Sessions and Irma. Irma Barber Sessions. And Spence Barton and his wife lived next door. The houses were right there together. Oh, now let's see. Where did I get to? I remember the big tomato fields and the big bean patches and the big beet patches. And it seems to me that I remember that where I think that the city, or the town, you call it the town offices, right there on the corner, back in that field, there was a little weighing station where the people went to weigh their beets.
On the east side of the street.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there was a Bountiful Lumber there for about 2 or 3 years, and then Walker's bought it out. So there was a building or lumber company there on the east side of the street across. I don't know whether that has connection with the weigh station or not.
No, there's just a little weigh station that wasn't very big, a little house. Because I remember that Ruth A. Walker worked there and weighed. I remember going over there because Ruth and I were on the activities committee with Betty Hanson and Carl Barber for a while before I was married, and I used to go over there and plan things with Ruth. Sit in that little house. I don't think that's a dream. I think that's real.
Well, they could have where they piled the beets and then took them up there to where they loaded them.
Yeah.
Because they used to pile them up there on Fritz's corner too.
That's right.
And they used to pile a lot of them over there where that dump come down there by our place. Dad
I
worked
remember
there.
that.
You gals in those days probably got an opportunity to do a little work on the farm too, didn't you?
Oh boy, I said many beets. I didn't top them, but I did thin them. And we picked strawberries and we picked beans. I just had those notes right here because I was just saying that snipping beans and peeling tomatoes, along with many others that worked there at the factory too, it was hard work, but it was a lot of fun. We did a lot of socializing and having a good time. I remember Nell Rampton so well. She was so much fun at the factory. Well, I was happy when my 14th birthday came, so I could work at the factory. You can work until you were 14. And really, that summer work blessed the town, really. The farmers that grew the crops and harvested them, and people that helped in the harvest, and they worked in the cannery. And my thoughts go back to the Japanese farmers who they grew so many wonderful crops, and their crops were always good, excellent crops. Everybody knows that. And I remember the Japanese families, the majority of the children were well behaved, and they were bright, good students in school. And of course, you know, they built their own church there, and they were quiet, law-abiding people. All right, Cleo? They were. I remember. What were the names of the girls that lived up above you? On the west, east of you, on the side.
I don't know who you mean.
Chico and Chio.
Yeah,
Chica and Chio. Can't remember their last names.
I can't remember right now either.
But then there was George Surratt.
Herrera?
Then I remember the Shibata family. You know about them, I guess, don't you?
Shamadas.
The Shibatas. George was an excellent student. Well, now some of the things that I did when I worked in the church, I started playing the piano for the primary when I was 12. And when I was 16, I was the play leader in primary. That was an assignment that they had in the primary at the time, and taught kids games and no dances and things like that. After that, I was active in the MIA helping with the planning the party games and all the decoration activities. And then I sat over to Bruce and Bay and Carl. And there was always a drama in the wintertime under the direction of the Mutual, I think. And they had a show every year. Always chose a play and chose the people in it for it. And then we would go all around the state. I'm sure it was under the direction of the Mutual because I remember being in one. And that brought me back to a memory of the old cheese factory. And I don't know who lived in the apartment above the cheese factory up by Gailey's, East of Gailey's. We went up there to practice. And Carl and Bay and Ruth and Ruth, the girl that had red hair, Ruth B, I called her. I remember them being there that night. Went up there in a big bobsleigh and that was fun. Anyway, we did take the plays all over the state. And there was, at one time, there was a play came from Hooper. And that's the time when I realized there was a boy named Bert Parker in the world. And the other thing I remember, I'm saying all of this in Cleo, you better get your 2 cents
Well,
worth.
no, they didn't ask me for any 2 cents worth. I'm just here to listen to you.
Oh, you rascal. Well, I remember sitting on our front steps and listening to the ward choir practice. See, we were within a block of the chapel. And I remember some of the choir leaders were Eli and David Cook, and I think David Thurgett. And the songs that I can still hear them sing, "For the strength of the hills we bless thee," and it just felt like the whole roof was coming off when they'd sing to me because I was a little girl. And "Come, Come Ye Saints." And I was happy when I was old enough to sing in the choir. That was a great experience. And I remember that Eli had a girls' chorus for a while. I sang in that chorus. You don't remember that, huh? Oh, that was fun. I don't think it lasted. I think it was just a small season. But I remember that David Cook was asked to sing in the Mormon Tabernacle Choir in Salt Lake. Did you ever hear that? He did. That was Joe's brother, oldest brother. He had a wonderful voice. But he did sing in the choir. And I remember one year that Eli had a male chorus. I can still hear them practicing because they were in a contest. And I don't know who sponsored that contest, whether it was involved in Farm Bureau or what it was, or whether it was the church. But the song they all had to sing was that song called Invictus. I don't have a voice anymore because I had a surgery there and my voice is gone. But anyway, I was thrilled when I could hear them practice over in the music over in the chapel. The other thing, when I was a teenager, and Cleo, you can remember this, maybe you can help me. A group of the girls learned how to play the ukulele. And we had an entertainment group of girls that played for entertainment in the ward, and we also went many other places. I remember going out to Hooper.
Well, I didn't go.
No, you were too involved with your mom.
I didn't do a lot of things that some of the others did.
Rhoda and Ruth, both Ruth were in it, and Louise. I was probably one of the youngest ones in it. But anyway, that was fun. But
Who was your leader?
What?
Who was the leader? Do you know?
Oh, we didn't have a leader. We
Just got together
Just
and
got together and sang, played our ukuleles. I remember walking up to the Clearfield station, the Barber station, walking up there and going to Ogden and buying sheet music and getting on the Bamberger. And coming back to Clearfield and walking home. Because they wanted a certain song, and I said, well, I'll do it. I went and got it. So they did play. We were invited to play at Salt Air at some big convention. I don't know whether it was semi-air, but it was Farm Bureau, because Farm Bureau did lots of things at that time that brought entertainment. And I remember the wonderful band that Eli had, the Scout Band, and I was so thrilled to find a picture of that, but I gave it to Elsie. And the reason I gave it to Elsie, there was Joe and Newell and Hubert and Woodard, all the Steve boys on that picture. And I thought that's where it should go, because I knew my kids would be interested in it. I gave it to her. I was happy to know that the mailbox was up on the corner, because I loved to write letters, and I had a lot of pen pals when I was a teenager. And I remember that David Sill from Layton carried the mail, first with a horse and buggy, and later he had an old Ford. Owen and I were talking about that yesterday.
Where was the mailbox?
It was right up by the store.
By the store, huh?
It was on the corner that the store was on, and it was, I bet there was 8 boxes there in a row. I remember standing there and watching David Sill come up the west and put all the mail in the boxes there, and then he'd go on easy. The other thing that I remember, Cleo, the Hanson and the James boys carried the Deseret News on their pinto pony. I think the name was Silver. Did they call that?
I don't remember the name.
Evan probably, didn't he say anything about that? Oh, my word.
Now, that was Clyde's younger brothers.
Uh-huh.
Well, they were, the Cecil and Garmin were half brothers, step brothers.
Step brothers. Did Evan tell you anything about his mother?
A little.
I think she passed away in 1918 with the flu. I can still see her. She was a lovely little lady and left a big, big family. Now, let's see. We talked about the barber shop. Mentioned the cheese factory. Did you know about the cheese factory?
That's up east
Where
of Gailey's.
Fellers is. Out there where that feller.
Now, Virginia Bodley and Leland lived up there for a while, didn't they?
And Eastman's used to live out there.
Eastman's did.
That rings a bell.
Bodley's?
Eastman's.
No, Eastman's.
Eastman's.
That rings a bell, but I didn't.
Bodley's would probably be later, wouldn't it, after.
Are Leland, Virginia still living?
Virginia is.
Virginia.
He's gone. He was the same age as Bessie. Virginia graduated from high school the same year Bert did from Weaver High.
She, I think, enjoyed fairly good health, Virginia. So.
Well, let's see. I just wanted to mention things about the old Syracuse Mercantile. I remember some of the people that worked there. Merlin Gailey, is that his name? Marlon Gailey. And Fay Hanson and Lynn Hanson. And let's see, there was another boy. Anyway, there was all of the Walker girls. May, Nora, Verna, Ivy, and Ruth all worked there. And Brother Walker was always there. And I remember I used to go through the back door. That was the door to the west. And then that was their storage, or their supply room, really. But there was a great big round keg of vinegar with a spigot on it. Where if you went to get a quart of vinegar, why, you just turn the spigot, fill the bottle of vinegar, and coal oil. It was coal oil. You had a little can with a little spigot on the top. They'd always fill that can with coal oil, and they always put a gumdrop in it so it wouldn't drip.
Oh. I remember that. And then the kids used to take them off and eat them.
Yeah. And I remember the great big round of cheese that was sitting on a kind of a, like a big plate that turned around, what do you call it, a rotating plate thing. And there was a big cutter that was fastened on it some way, so that they just move it to, like if you wanted a pound of cheese, right, Brother Walker knew pretty well about how much to cut off. He wanted a pound, and he'd cut it down and wrap it up for you. We took eggs to the store. Instead of money, I remember that.
Eggs and butter.
makes him better. That was interesting. Well, I was one of the first students to ride the school bus, Cleo, and so was you.
Into Davis.
Into Davis. I was in their 10th grade. And I remember, Cleo, can you remember this, when the kids swayed that bus side to side so hard? Right up by the viaduct there, it turned on its side, because the kids were going like this, you know. Turned over. I've got a little picture in there of that school bus. No, about me personally, I loved high school, and I was the student body song mistress in my senior year. I was like the cheerleaders now. And I graduated in 1929. I just put a little line in here that says, you can take the girl out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the girl. And I'll tell you who read that line to me when I first heard it was David Miller. I was working here in Salt Lake in a shoe store, and he came in to buy some shoes one day, and we got to reminiscing, and I told him how much I still, after all these years, wanted to go back to Syracuse to live. And he just said that to me. You take the girl out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the girl.
Well, you wouldn't want to live there now because you wouldn't know anybody.
Well, I
It's changed
know.
so much
I
that
know.
you'd be lost. It'd be just like living down here now.
Yeah. Well,
It's
no, I
not
just
the
put the
same.
Bennett family in there. And how much they meant to me. Cleo's dad was wonderful to me. So was their mother. And spent a lot of time in their home. Because Cleo was taking care of her mother so much and couldn't get out with the girls and socialize. And they asked me to come and stay with her many times, and it was just a thrill to be there. Telling you a little bit about Bert and I mentioned that I saw him in a show in Hooper. Later, he came to the factory to work with his brother. His brother was a mechanic, Ted Parker. He was a mechanic at the factory, and he brought his brothers with him. And so the year that, I probably was in my sophomore year at school, he came to school to work, to the factory to work, and we got acquainted, and that developed into our romance. And after I had 2 years of Twitter, we were married in 31, and I left school in 1929. And now, we lived in Salt Lake ever since we were married. Bert worked at the Salt Lake Hardware. He started working at a place called the Ogden Hardware in Ogden. And the Salt Lake Hardware, that hardware fell through, and the Salt Lake Hardware picked up the Ogden Hardware, and Bert was working there, so they transferred him to Salt Lake in the fall of 1930. And in June of 1931, we were married. And he was the son of George and Nellie Parker of Hooper. And I remember, you don't remember John and Pearl Stoker, do you? You remember them? Their oldest daughter was Letha. And I have a beautiful picture of her in here. Letha was younger. She had a beautiful voice, as her mother did, and so did I, but it was all the same family, the Cox family. And Letha's mother and Bert's father were cousins. Well, it was a big Cox reunion out at Hooper, and they asked Cleo to sing.
Didn't ask me.
I mean Letha.
You said they asked Cleo to
Yeah,
sing.
I went out there and played for her to sing. I remember that. That's how I really found out who Bert was. He worked at the Salt Lake Hardware for 45 years. Started as a clerk in the warehouse. Finally became an assistant buyer for a number of years, and then in 1951 he was made the buyer of the housewares department in the Salt Lake Hardware. And so he was there until he retired. He retired in 1975. In 1941, we'd been married 10 years. We decided we wanted a home of our own. So we bought a piece of property out here and built this home. And no one else has lived here but us. And we enjoyed 15 years serving in the Salt Lake Temple. And the fun things we do now are we go to the basketball games when every time we get a chance. We never miss the high school 4A basketball finals.
Mm-hmm.
And we go to the Jazz once in a while. We like it. And we like the university basketball games. And we haven't had season tickets to that for a long time because our son gave them to us. And we like the theater. Go to the University Pioneer Memorial Theater with some dear friends. And Bert has been in the Junior Chamber of Commerce activities years ago. He was a director for a while on their board and then was later became a vice president. So we got to meet an awful lot of people away from the church that are still our good friends. And Bert has worked in the state MIA, the presidency, and he worked in the board and the presidency. He's worked in the bishopric when we built two buildings, two chapels, one right over here and then one way up here. Those buildings were built within about 7 years. He was the finance chairman of both of those buildings when they were built. And I left the junior Sunday school work and I worked in Relief Society and then into presidencies. And right now we're just kind of going along. Kind of retired from everything, but and Bert, beautiful, since you retired, has always liked and intrigued with beautiful handwork. That picture right there you can see.
I've been watching that.
He
That's
did
pretty.
that one in the dining room. He makes a lot of lovely things for the primary festival trees to support the primary hospital. We have 2 children, 10 grandchildren. One not with us, he passed away when he was a baby. 9 living grandchildren. 5 great-grandchildren. Pride and joy. And what else can I tell you?
Do you have any, no, whether that's a picture album
No, but
that you
I've got
have
some
there?
pictures. Would you like to see some pictures?
We can zoom in on them. You want to cut off for just a minute, son? If you had,
This was taken when I was in the 8th grade and Jess was younger.
okay. You'll have it.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure. I'll use these pictures that are more concerned with the ward. If I have, this is such a little picture and it's not very good. But that's the old bus that got tipped over. That was the first school bus.
Yeah. You wouldn't have a negative of that.
No, I'm sorry. Do you want to take it with you?
If you didn't mind, if you'd trust us with it, we'd get a negative
I'll
and
trust you, Don.
get that. That would be, that was the first school bus to go to
Yeah, Cleo.
Davis High School. That's quite interesting, isn't it?
I wish it was clearer. This is the picture that was in the Tribune when the old chapel burned. Well, those are the only ones that I have of, that relates to the family.
You have one of your mother and father?
Yes, I do. Cleo, there's one. That's a precious one. Well, you can look at all of these because you recognize a lot of people on them. Now, did Bessie show you this one?
No.
I didn't put that in my little talk, but the year that Bessie was in the 9th grade, that was when the courtship started with Bess and Owen.
Oh.
There was an operetta that was put on by the North Davis High School, and it was called The Magic Wheel. And Bessie and Owen sang the leads.
They told us about it, but
And there's the picture. Now I'll hold it up there. Just tell you, there's a lot of people on there that you probably would remember from Clinton and West Point and Syracuse, and maybe some from Sunset. Bessie's got a bigger one than this.
What year would that be, approximately?
Now, let's see. My guess is Bess and Owen were married in 21. My guess, either 19 or 20. And I don't know for sure exactly. Because she was married at 16. So she must have been, Cleo, take a peek at that. Jed's on there, if you can find him. And I should mention Cleo's brother. He's like my brother. Let's see. Now what else? You wanted a picture of my mother? I think that I'll show you. This is my father. I'll show you this one first. My father was in the presidency of the Davis State. And in 1915, the state was divided. So that was the year that North Davis State came into, and I think it was 1915. And Dad was made a high councilman then, along with Cleo's father, I think. And they were Dan Walker, I think Brother Nalder. No, Brother Nalder was the first bishop that I remember. He and Brother Arnold Miller and Osro Stoker were my bishops that I remember. Now, Bessie gave you a picture of our home.
yes.
There. Now, you wanted a picture of your mother. I've got two of them. Cleo, tell me, which one do you think you remember Mother at?
Well, both of them, but I like this one over here.
I do
It's
too.
the best.
I do too. I'm glad you chose it, because I like it the best.
They both like it.
Okay.
It's a good picture, isn't it?
Nice. This one too. They're both nice.
Well, that would kind of reminds me of President Smith's wife. One that sang the Tabernacle Choir for so many years.
Jessie?
Yeah. Is she a relative
No,
somewhere down the line?
Only through President Smith.
She doesn't that look like her though?
Well, we're not going to put this one in any book. I won't let you. But I'll let you see it.
Okay.
That was taken in Bodley's Pond.
You won't let us get it on video.
I was there unless I talked to those, and then I graduated from seminary. They had the seminary students go out all over the states and talk in sacrament meeting. And if I went any place like that, I had to depend on Cleo because she drove her dad's car all the time. And she took me, but before I went over to that meeting in West Point, I had to talk in West Point. Before I went over to that meeting, I had dinner with Cleo. We'd been to Sunday school and I went over to her place to dinner. And the meeting started at 2 o'clock in those days, you know, that's when they had Sunday school in the morning and meeting in the afternoon. And Cleo, Brother Bennett stopped me in the dining room, admired my dress, wished me luck, and complimented me on accepting the invitation in church. Yeah, that's a precious memory.
Was this their whole family?
Yeah. When they were little, that's when they went, that was taken in New York.
When they were back there?
Now, do you want me to give you Elsie's address? Elsie's Street?
Yes, we'd appreciate that.
Let me look and see what I can get.